What should the government actually be responsible for? At first, the answer seems obvious. Laws, courts, public safety, national defense. These are things a country cannot realistically ask every person to organize for themselves. But then the questions get harder. Healthcare, education, housing, jobs, prices, poverty. Suddenly, the line is not so clear, because almost every serious problem eventually creates the same argument. One side says the government has to do something. The other says the government is going too far. And both sides may have a point. If the government does too little, ordinary people can be left facing problems they have almost no power to solve. If the government takes responsibility for everything, it becomes expensive, powerful, complicated, and capable of creating problems of its own. So maybe the real question is not whether government is good or bad. It is this: when does a problem actually become the government's responsibility? That is what I want to figure out. Start with the easiest cases. A country needs laws. It needs courts. It needs some form of public safety. It needs to defend itself. These are collective problems. You cannot realistically tell every family to create its own court system. You cannot ask every neighborhood to negotiate its own national defense. Some things only work when people act together. So that gives us the first rule. When a problem cannot realistically be solved by individuals acting alone, government has a stronger reason to take responsibility. But that still leaves a huge gray area. Take healthcare. Getting seriously sick is not like choosing whether to buy a new television. A patient may need treatment immediately, have no real ability to compare prices, and know far less about the treatment than the person providing it. Walking away may not be a realistic option. That gives government a stronger reason to be involved, but it still does not tell us exactly how. Government could provide care directly, help people pay for it, regulate private providers, or guarantee some basic level of treatment. Each approach creates different costs and trade-offs. Suppose an important medicine becomes extremely expensive. Lowering the price may help patients immediately, while the company may argue that it leaves less money for future research. The government has to judge that trade-off. But underneath it is a more basic question. How much control did the patient really have? They did not choose to become sick, and they cannot simply decide they no longer need the medicine. That does not mean government should provide everything. But the less control people have over serious harm, the stronger the case for helping them survive it. Education raises a similar question for a different reason. A child does not choose their family, their neighborhood, or whether the local school is excellent or struggling. Yet the education they receive can shape the rest of their life. That gives government a strong reason to make sure children have a real opportunity to learn. But responsibility does not mean every decision has to be controlled from the same place. Parents, teachers, local communities, and national institutions may all have legitimate roles. The important distinction is that government responsibility does not always mean government control over every detail. Sometimes government guarantees access, sometimes it provides funding or basic rules, and sometimes it simply makes sure the system does not become abusive or impossible to use. The right role depends on the problem. Housing makes that even clearer. Everyone needs somewhere to live. But housing is also built, owned, rented, bought, and sold by people who have their own interests. Renters want affordable homes. Homeowners may want their neighborhoods to stay the same. Builders want projects they can actually make money from. Local governments control building rules. Residents may want more restrictions. Other residents may want fewer. Now imagine the government decides housing is too expensive and wants to fix it. What should it do? It could help people pay rent, build homes, change planning rules, encourage private construction, or limit certain prices. Every option helps someone, and almost every option creates a cost somewhere else. A rule that protects current renters may reduce the incentive to build. A rule that encourages construction may upset existing residents. A subsidy may help people afford housing while also pushing demand higher. Doing nothing may leave millions of people unable to afford a basic need. This is where government responsibility becomes difficult. Because sometimes there is no policy that helps everyone. The government has to choose between competing costs. That gives us another important test. It is not enough to ask whether a policy helps. We also have to ask who pays for that help and what new problem the solution may create. That is true almost everywhere. Take jobs. Most people need work to survive. But should the government be responsible for making sure every person always has a job? Probably not in the literal sense. Businesses still decide whether to hire. Customers decide what to buy. Technology changes industries. Companies succeed and fail. Old jobs disappear. New ones appear. The government cannot freeze the economy in place. But imagine a factory closes in a small town. The company says it can no longer afford to keep the factory open. The workers say the entire community depends on those jobs. Both things may be true. So what should government do? Forcing the company to stay could mean keeping a failing business alive indefinitely. Walking away completely could leave thousands of people facing a crisis they did not create and could not realistically stop. The better role may be somewhere in between. Government may not be able to save every old job, but it can help people through the change. Workers may need retraining or support while they look for new opportunities, and the town may need investment so one factory closure does not become a permanent collapse. That is different from promising that nothing will ever change. It is accepting that change is unavoidable while deciding that one event should not destroy someone's future forever. Protect people from catastrophic damage. Do not pretend every loss can be prevented. That principle also matters during emergencies. A flood destroys homes. A major fire spreads across a region. A storm cuts off power. People cannot individually organize a national emergency response while the disaster is happening. They need rescue, coordination, resources, information. This is one of the clearest cases for government action. But even here, responsibility has limits. A temporary emergency program can become permanent. A rule created during a crisis may remain long after the crisis ends. Contracts signed quickly can become difficult to remove. An agency created for one problem can eventually start looking for reasons to continue existing. So government needs to know not only when to step in, it also needs to know when to step back. That may be one of the most overlooked parts of government responsibility. Starting something is politically easy. Ending it can be much harder. Because once a program exists, workers may depend on the jobs, companies on the contracts, communities on the funding, and politicians on the support it generates. Eventually, a program created to solve one problem can develop an entire network of people who benefit from its survival. That does not mean the program is bad. It means government has interests too. Government institutions have interests of their own too. Departments may want larger budgets, agencies may want more authority, and politicians may want programs they can point to as achievements. Everyone is still fighting for something, so government responsibility has to include another responsibility: checking whether government itself is still useful. A program should not survive forever simply because ending it would be politically uncomfortable. The question cannot only be, did we spend the money? It has to be, did the problem actually get better? Did housing become more affordable? Did patients get better care? Did children learn more? Did people find work? Did the emergency program solve the emergency it was created for? And if it did not work, what changes? Because a government that never admits failure can become just as trapped by its own interests as any company or organization. This is why cost matters too. Almost every government promise sounds easier before someone asks who pays. Healthcare, schools, public safety, housing programs, and emergency support all require resources. If government takes responsibility for more, it usually needs more resources. That means taxes, borrowing, fees, or taking money away from something else. So every new responsibility creates a trade-off. A program may genuinely help one family while increasing costs for another. A workplace rule may protect employees while making it more expensive to hire. A tax may pay for something valuable while making it harder for a small business to survive. That does not mean the policy is automatically wrong, but the cost cannot disappear from the argument just because the goal is good. Government has to ask two questions at the same time: who needs help, and who is being asked to provide it? Political arguments often focus on only one side. One side talks about the people who benefit and ignores the cost. The other talks about the cost and ignores the people who needed help. A serious government has to look at both, and it has to look beyond the first year. A policy can feel successful immediately and create problems later. A cheap solution today can become an expensive promise tomorrow. A rule meant to protect one group can slowly make it harder for everyone else to enter the system. Intentions matter, but results matter more. Then there is another question. Even when government has a responsibility, should government itself provide the service? Not always. Sometimes private companies can deliver something more efficiently. Sometimes competition gives people better choices. Sometimes local organizations understand a problem better than a national department. And sometimes private organizations cannot solve the problem fairly because the people who need the service have too little bargaining power. So the question should not always be government or market. Sometimes the better question is, What does government need to guarantee? And who is best placed to actually deliver it? Government could fund a service without running it directly, set basic rules while allowing private competition, or provide a public option alongside private alternatives. In other cases, it may only need to intervene when serious abuses appear. The answer does not have to be the same for every problem, and that leads to the question of which government should act. Not every problem needs to be solved from Washington. Some problems are genuinely local. A city may understand its roads better than the federal government. A state may want to organize parts of its education system differently from another state. Local government can be closer to the people affected by its decisions. But local government is not automatically fair. A small group of homeowners can dominate housing meetings. One major employer can have enormous influence over a town. A local government can be captured just as easily as a national one. So moving power closer to people does not automatically mean the people have more power. Sometimes the national government is too distant. Sometimes local power is too concentrated. The right level depends on the problem. Does it cross state lines? Can one area's decision seriously harm people somewhere else? Are basic rights involved? Does the problem require resources that local government does not have? Or would national control destroy useful local flexibility? Those questions matter more than saying local is always better or federal is always better. Then we reach the hardest line of all: personal responsibility. Government cannot protect everyone from every bad decision. If someone knowingly takes a reckless risk, should everyone else always rescue them? If a company makes terrible decisions and fails, should taxpayers automatically save it? If a local government ignores a problem for years, should everyone else pay when the consequences arrive? At some point, responsibility has to remain with the person or organization that made the choice. Otherwise, something dangerous happens. People can keep the reward when the decision goes well and hand the cost to everyone else when it goes badly. That is not responsibility. But the opposite extreme is unfair too. Children did not choose their circumstances. People can become sick without doing anything wrong. A worker can lose a job because of a decision made by executives thousands of miles away. A family can lose its home in a natural disaster despite doing everything responsibly. So maybe the key question is control. How much control did the person actually have over what happened? The less control they had, the stronger the case for government help. The more knowingly they created the risk, the weaker that case becomes. That will never create a perfect line, but it gives us something useful to judge. And the same rule should apply to powerful organizations. A large company should not be allowed to take enormous risks, keep the profits when everything goes well, and then expect ordinary taxpayers to absorb the losses when the risk fails. People should not be protected from every consequence, but neither should powerful companies. The standard should not completely change depending on who is asking for help. There is one complication. Sometimes allowing the person who caused the problem to fail can hurt millions of innocent people. A huge company can make terrible decisions. Its leaders may deserve the consequences, but its collapse could also destroy jobs, pensions, suppliers, and entire communities. Now the government faces a much harder decision. It may need to protect innocent people from the collapse without protecting the people who caused it. That distinction matters. Helping the victims of a failure is not necessarily the same as rewarding the people responsible for it. A good government should know the difference, and all of this brings us back to power. Every new government responsibility creates a new government decision, and every important decision attracts people who want to influence it. Companies want rules they can survive under. Workers want protection. Unions want to defend members. Advocacy groups want their causes taken seriously. Government departments want resources. Politicians want programs they can defend. Ordinary people want problems solved without being crushed by the cost. Everyone has something to protect. That does not make them evil. But it does mean the government has to be careful not to confuse the most organized interest with the most important one. A company may have experts studying a policy every day. An ordinary person may only discover that policy when their bill changes. That imbalance will probably never disappear, but government can make decisions easier to judge. For any major responsibility, people should be able to ask, what problem are we solving? Why is government involved? Who benefits? Who pays? What happens if we do nothing? What new problems could this create? And when will we check whether it worked? Those questions should not require a law degree to understand. Because ordinary people cannot follow every meeting, they cannot read every government document, They cannot hire someone to watch every rule. Most people only see the result: a higher bill, a lower price, a new job, a lost job, a shorter wait, a worse service, a safer street, a new tax. So the government owes people more than good intentions. It owes them a reason they can understand, and it owes them evidence afterward. So where does that leave us? I do not think there is one list that tells government exactly what to own, fund, regulate, or leave alone. But the argument does keep returning to the same few questions. Can people realistically solve the problem themselves, or are they trapped by something too large for individual action? How much control do they have over the harm? What happens to everyone else if nobody acts? We also have to ask whether a private solution would leave one side with so much power that everyone else becomes dependent on it. And even when government has a strong reason to step in, the final test is whether its action is likely to improve the problem enough to justify the cost and the power it requires. That question can never be ignored, because government can solve problems, but government can also waste money, create dependency, protect failing systems, give powerful groups new ways to influence decisions, and continue programs long after they stop working. So responsibility should never mean unlimited responsibility. Government should be strongest where collective action is genuinely necessary, where people face serious problems they could not realistically avoid or solve alone, where the consequences of private decisions fall on people who had no say in making them, and where leaving everything to private power would give one side too much control over everyone else. But every responsibility should come with limits. Who pays? Is it working? And when should the government step back? Maybe that is the balance, not a government that promises to solve everything, and not a government that watches people struggle with problems they could never realistically solve alone. A government that understands the difference between helping people and controlling everything, between protecting people from disaster and protecting them from every consequence, between stepping in because action is necessary and staying involved simply because leaving has become difficult. Because everyone is fighting for something. Companies are trying to survive. Workers are trying to protect their livelihoods. Taxpayers are trying to protect what they earn. Government departments are trying to protect their programs. Politicians are trying to protect their support. And ordinary people are trying to build lives inside the system all of those groups are fighting over. The government's job cannot be to make every group happy. That is impossible. Its job should be to decide which problems genuinely require collective action, help where people cannot reasonably protect themselves, make the costs honest, and keep checking whether the solution is actually better than the problem. So where would you draw the line? What is one thing you think the government should absolutely be responsible for? And if you like breaking political systems down like this and rebuilding them from scratch, subscribe. There are a lot more questions like this to test.